When I realized I was going to be on a panel called something like How to Save Liberal Democracy, I thought that was a pretty big task. Protecting. Okay, thank you. Anyway, so I opened up Democracy in America again, and I would recommend everyone do so. It's a wonderful book. And it struck me that maybe the right thing for, a couple of hours might be to think about, how can we protect liberal democracy? How can we literally, the people in this room, protect liberal democracy? Because I think one of the sentiments that I've felt a lot over the last few weeks has been a feeling of powerlessness, right? That something has happened to this country that is, I think, for many people, morally unacceptable. And it seems really big and out of our reach to solve. And so Tocqueville, as he has in a number of other cases, really brought me to what I think might be an answer worth talking about. Because I think that when I think about what can I do, okay, I do research, I do writing, I know many people in this room do that kind of thing. You are engaged every day in maintaining our free press, right? I mean, these are fundamental tasks and skills that will be necessary in the coming years. But I think sometimes we focus on our skills and we forget about our networks, right? And I think this builds on what you were just bringing up. And specifically, not just our networks, but our associations, right? I don't know how many of you remember what Tocqueville had to say on this subject. He was a pessimist on the subject of democracy and visited the United States in the 1830s, primarily, I think, with the goal of understanding why on earth it wasn't tyranny yet. Would be the simplest version of the question behind his book. And part of his answer, well, he had sort of a twofold answer. One was what he called an equality of social conditions. That is to say that wealthy people were not that rich and that poor people were not that poor. And this allowed for a certain kind of equality, right? And I think that's a challenge that we face by comparison, certainly. And he also talked about the amazing spirit of American voluntarism, right? And people participated in local organizations. And they participated in them in a way that is almost, I think, feels like it's from another country today. But when they participated in an organization, I mean, to give you an example of a way I've participated in an organization lately, and I would imagine I'm not alone in the room, of having re-upped my membership to the ACLU, right? Who hasn't done that in the last few weeks? You oughta. Because, there's some lawyers who are going to need to do some lawyering, I suspect. And I'm proud to be able to support them in a small way. But that is a good thing to do. I think there are many other great causes at a national level that we need to talk about. But it is not, my membership is not a particularly democratic act. I did not go to a meeting. I did not vote for anything. I did not debate or discuss with my fellow citizens anything at all, right? And it was those things. It was the fact that local community organizations replicated the system of the federal government at the local level so that taught people how to govern, in Tocqueville's opinion. What it meant, it wasn't that people did an abstract understanding, read long books about what liberal democracy meant. They knew what liberal democracy was because when they went to the meeting of the Oddfellows or the Grange or any of a number of other local community organizations that also had a national structure that allowed you to have influence locally at a state level and nationally, right? When they went to those meetings, they voted. And they voted in organizations where the mayor and local farmers were one group, right? Where they knew one another and where people who didn't have great means still had a seat at the table, right? And that experience of governing, Tocqueville said, is the reason that Americans can govern themselves. So between the 1830s and about the 1960s, this was the American tradition, right? The organizations changed, right? The Grange faded out with time, and unions became a big piece of this. Greenpeace was an organization on this model for a long time. But after the 1960s, we started having more and more organizations that were nationally centered, had a more managerial style, and they had members, sure, who maybe got letters back then or emails today and sent in a check every now and again, but they didn't participate. Right? So I think if we're going to talk today about what it means to defend democracy, we have to talk about what it means to be democracy, right? Ourselves. We defend democracy by practice, okay? So what I spent yesterday doing was making a list of every member or every association I am a member of. It is actually quite a long list. I'm a member of at least 2 professional associations. I'm a member of 2 alumni networks. I'm a member of several organizations that are within Brookings. I am a member of a local church. And all of these institutions are democratic in their basic functioning, right? They are a congregational church. You have meetings. There's a budget. You vote on it, right? The American Political Science Association sent me regular emails trying to get me to vote for their members, and I never did it, right? Ward 1 in Columbia Heights, I am a resident. I should be at those meetings, and I'm not, right? So I think if we're going to talk about exactly this kind of thing that you were saying, about the need to revitalize our civic communities, it actually does literally need to start with us in this room, and to recognize that we have tremendous skills that we can project onto a national stage, right? So many of us in this room have that power. But we also have our immediate power that comes from our associations and our networks. And it's in those contexts that we're not an individual. We're not the lone voice in the wilderness. We're not just the person who's tweeting, like so many others, about what a horrible thing Donald Trump said about what should happen to people who engage in political protest. Perhaps they should lose their citizenship, right? It is important to say that that is wrong, and it is important to support the national organizations that will defend those people. But we also need to remember that our democracy starts at home, right? And that if we, I knew I would get emotional. I get very emotional on the subject. That if we try to implement democracy as individuals, we will fail. And if we try to implement democracy together, we will win. So what do I... So what are some concrete things we can do? Think about your organizations. Think about the associations where you have tremendous power, because you know what? No one goes to those meetings. We all know that, right? Having studied the Tea Party, took over local Republican commissions on a regular basis because they brought 50 people, and there were 3 others in the room, right? They had all the officer positions. I deeply disagree with the politics, the policy positions of Tea Party activists. I was deeply impressed by their activism, and I think that the fact that the resurgence on the right empowered this particular president is a tragedy, right? In the very real sense of that term. So what can we do? You're all going to go to your ward meetings. What are some things we can do? I thought of a few things. One thing is try and connect that association that you're a part of, that you can make a difference in, to the communities that we know are going to be at risk, right? We know that Muslim people, Latino people, poor people in this country are going to get the brunt of whatever's to come. We don't know exactly how, but I think we can predict that much, right? So make your association a bridge to those communities. Find the members of that association that are of those communities and raise them up, right? And also, I think one value of that is that it will allow, it makes the we bigger. This is something that you said, right? That we need a larger we, right? So this is not about charity. It is about solidarity with communities that are going to likely face a real challenge in the coming years. And finally, I think that this approach, right, that taking our associations that already exist, that already have democratic elements in them, that are already designed on the model, the sort of virtuous model, right, taking those organizations, rebuilding them across the very rifts that Donald Trump benefited from. And we know what those were, right? Rifts of geography, rifts of race, and rifts of class, and rifts of gender. Right? We can rebuild across those rifts ourselves, right? And so there's a lot we're going to have to do, but I think we could learn a lot from the generations that preserved our democracy for so long. Yeah.
Thank you, Vanessa.
My name is Jim Connors. I'm an angry white guy. And I'm angry because after 50 years of being a feminist supporter, I just can't get over the majority of white women went into the privacy of a voting booth and pulled a lever for Trump. But I'm not sure whether I'm more angry at all the youth that I pay to support when most millennials didn't show up to vote at all. And the question is, as an angry old white guy, somewhat rich, why would I even step up to care? So why don't they deserve it? Why doesn't America deserve to suffer?
That's the kind of question that can go answered or unanswered, as people prefer. In the back.
First, it's a great question, Phil.
First the woman with the red hair, and then in the back from there.
Thanks. Tough act to follow. My name's Charlotte, and I want to bring it back a little bit to, there are a couple of mentions of the rifts. and more specifically then the question of integration. And I think that one of the things that's so, perhaps only for me, easy to forget is that I live in DC, and I don't live in any of the places that maybe could use the integration. I don't live in any of the places because I don't have access to the geographic rifts. So I'm going to my board meetings in Forest Hills, and that's not getting anybody else out. So really, like, how do you bridge that rift when we're here in this room and where we need to be is many other places?
I wouldn't mind speaking to this.
please do.
So on the question of the rift, obviously this is hard, right? This is very, very hard. I think a lot of us aren't from DC. A lot of us have friends back home, right? And I think that that's one route to remembering that, so I'm from Sacramento, California. It's kind of, if you're not from California, you don't realize that we're not like the coast, We're the middle of California. We're very middle America in that way. And so, I mean, yeah, obviously, residential segregation is a real problem in a lot of ways. It's a problem like gerrymandering is a problem, right? It divides our communities and makes the election of more extreme people more likely. But one of the reasons why I think that it's good to work in your community, but it's got to be part of a national structure, is because that's one of the ways you actually get to reach people beyond your local folks, right? So my local chapter of the organizations that I care about is part of a national federation of chapters, and that was how it used to be when geographic divides were, of course, larger because it was harder to get places, right? That you would, once a year, you'd see each other at that state convention, and that helped bridge those divides, right? On the other question, I think I really do want to respond to that. Why you should care, I think that question comes from a place, you said it comes from a place of anger, and I wonder if it doesn't come from a place of despair, because I know that you wouldn't bother to be angry if you didn't care, right? And I know that because of the level of frustration you expressed in your question. So I almost don't want to take you up on the premise because I know you didn't mean it. What you want is to someone to tell you right now that this country is better than Donald Trump. And if you needed to hear that, I'm happy to say it to you, but you already knew it, all right?
I think it's, look, that's I want to just question that. I don't even know what that means. What does it mean to say our country is better than Donald Trump? Why is that the presumption? I'm not even sure what that means. He is our elected he represents our country.
I don't think our system works well, and I think that, to get back to your institutional questions, right, to get back to your institutional questions, there were serious problems, right, with all the things you talked about, gerrymandering and voter suppression, and the fact that we don't make our parties, between the two of them, do not make a case that convinces half of Americans to get to the polls.
But what does it mean that we're better than Donald Trump? I want to make sure I know what that means.
It's almost impossible to talk about how many ways we're better. I'm overwhelmed by my options right now. Go ahead.
Let me give you a personal answer to that. So first of all, let's remember that this is not about the United States of America. It's about Western liberal democracies. The same thing that's happening in America is sadly happening in France, where Marine Le Pen may be the next president. And even if she isn't, François Fillon is going to be, and he's not that much better. It's about Austria, where this Sunday we're essentially likely to elect a neo-Nazi to the country's presidency. It's about Sweden, which has always looked like the one great example of where the Sweden Democrats, an actual, that 10 years ago was a neo-Nazi movement, is now the leading party in opinion polls. Not a majoritarian one, but 25–30%. So this goes beyond the United States of America. So let's not despair about America, let's despair about the world. Upbeat message. But more seriously, look, I don't know whether we are at the end of the era of liberal democracy in the world, and everything we're talking about today is fighting windmills, or whether this, and there is an optimistic vision here, or whether this is going to be a 15–20-year crisis. It's going to inculcate younger people who've started to take a lot of the things that really matter for granted, because they'll see how terrible it is to live under somebody like Donald Trump or Marine Le Pen or Viktor Orban, and we actually forge a better politics out of it? I don't know. It may be the former. We may be fighting windmills.
What about the
I know.
What if they like it?
No, I know.
No, I know. As a
Yeah, no,
serious,
that's part of the point,
okay, yeah.
It may be that it turns out that a lot of people like it. Here's what I'm going to tell you. A, I'm willing to fight windmills. I don't know what on earth else, I was going to swear again, what on earth else to do, right? If it's fighting windmills, I'm going to be fighting windmills because I believe in liberal democracy, and if that's the fight that I'm going to fight losingly for my life, that's what I'm going to do. But one thing specifically about the United States of America, which is that this is not just a fight about liberal democracy, it's a fight for multi-ethnic democracy. It's a fight for the idea that people of different religions, different ethnicities, different beliefs can come together and form a nation together. As somebody, I'm not going to tell you my life story, but I'm starting a weekly column tomorrow. It's late, so please follow it. This is my one plug. The first column is going to be saying the following, that I've lived in Germany, in England, in Italy, in France. I am not more hopeful for multi-ethnic democracy in those places than I am in the United States. We're fighting here for the survival of multi-ethnic democracy in the United States, but also around the world. And I'm currently applying to become a US citizen, and now I'm getting emotional, because I think that this country is more likely to pull it off than anywhere else, and that if it fails here, it's going to fail everywhere. So yes, the United States of America is better than Donald Trump, and our fight for the next 4 or 8 years is to prove that it is.
Okay, I hate to do this, because there are a lot of questions. I want that to be the last word. I appreciate all you coming. I want to thank Yascha for putting this group of people and this group of people together. I'm really glad you encouraged this conversation. And there's food and drink, I don't know, for a little while longer. Thank you all for coming.